All right, so a couple months ago, Howie Mandel was on Not Today, Pal, the podcast with Jamie Lynn Sigler and Rob Eiler from The Sopranos. And this was a rough podcast for them because Howie was just insufferable. And I actually made a video about it when it happened because it was just so awkward. And you could tell Jamie and Rob were uncomfortable, even though they were trying their best to just keep it going and act like they're having a good time. But you could tell this was not a fun podcast for them. And most of the comments were pointing out how annoying Howie was. Like this person said, why was Howie so rude to Rob? Howie just criticized everything he said. This was hard to watch. Somebody else said, wow, Howie's just the biggest speed bump this whole conversation. And another person said, this is why Dana White walked off Howie Mandel's podcast. And another comment was like, I wish there was an after show where they talked about how the guest was. And luckily for them, there's not an after show, but we did get to hear what they thought about this podcast, and it's what we expected. Like on their most recent episode, they talked about this terrible guest that they had that they didn't get along with. And they don't mention Howie's name at all, but pretty much everybody could figure out who it is. The top comments for this podcast are, it must be Howie, right? And everybody in the comments is agreeing with them. They're like, yeah, that's who it is. Because also they haven't had many guests on to begin with. And I'm sure the Howie Mandel one stands out as definitely being the most awkward.
Like if there's certain things I'm like, I don't want that in, or, I don't want to call anybody out, but sometimes you have a guest who you don't really like very much.
Oh, have you had that?
People notice. Listen, I don't. Maybe we did. Maybe we did. Yeah, maybe we did.
No, obviously no names. No names. But can I ask you?
There'll be no way they could figure it out.
No. Because I've had.
No one noticed.
Yeah.
I've had things like that too, where you're just not clicking with a person, or there's something, or they come in with a fucking attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What, you don't have to say who the person was, but what was it? Were they snotty?
They didn't want to be here, it felt, from the second they walked in, and to the point where we just felt like we don't have to do this. And it was just not a lack of respect, but a lack of respect. It was just like, we're here just doing our podcast. We're not claiming to be anything, and I think this person was just coming with a lot of judgments about the two of us, it seemed. And then
but also pretended like they didn't know who we were,
right? And then when we were trying to wrap it up multiple times, he kept he kept going with it. And then I don't know, I now it's going to be obvious, but like it was disappointing because it just felt like, if you don't want to be here, we don't have to do this. We can record 2 episodes, just us, just fine. We're good. Like I just felt very uncomfortable. And this is a place where I feel the most comfortable. So it was upsetting to me for that reason. And to the point where I was like, so in my head about it, I thought I was the only one that experienced it, until later we were all like, oh, that was rough.
Yeah, and it definitely seemed like he didn't want to be there, and he was giving them a tough time with like everything they said. They would ask him a question, and then he'd act all confused and act like whatever they said is crazy. And then he'd make these really cringy jokes about everything that you could tell Rob and Jamie would laugh at just to make things seem less uncomfortable. It honestly felt like Howie was trying to annoy them and make things really awkward for them. And he just seemed kind of passive-aggressive as well. But none of it was funny at all. If it were funny, I could kind of understand. But half the time, it was just like him making some stupid joke and them sitting there like, is this guy serious? And the jokes were always making fun of them. Whenever they would ask a question or say something, he'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, are you crazy? He could never just give a normal response or act like a normal person.
Every time we asked a question, it was the answer was making fun of us in the answer.
In acting, you're supposed to do yes and. Like somebody says something, and to continue an improv, you go yes and. It was just no. It was no.
Wow.
It was the opposite of yes and. Everything was no.
Right.
When it ended, did you talk to the person? Was there like a moment where like, oh, they
lovely. They were lovely. They were like, no. I thought
they were not lovely.
Well, I lovely. He had a much different vibe after.
Yeah, and he probably had a different vibe after because he was done with the podcast and now he could leave. And also Howie's really annoying because you can never tell when he's joking or not. Like he'll ask a serious question or say something in a serious manner, and then when somebody responds or if the conversation goes on, then he'll just be like, I'm joking. Like you guys really can't tell. But it's like, what is the joke? Nothing was funny. And it seems like he's just coming up with his own inside jokes or something. And also on the podcast, Howie mentioned that he's a big fan of The Sopranos, and I think he said he's a big fan of theirs, which who knows if he's being serious or not, because also he was all confused like about their relationship, and he's acting like he didn't really know who they were. Like I think he called her the wrong name at one point. So it'd just be really annoying to deal with somebody on your podcast that clearly doesn't want to be there, but you have to try to just suffer through it. Even though it sounds like if they weren't doing this for YMH, then they might have just asked him if he wanted to end it halfway through and scrap the podcast, because obviously he didn't want to be there and it wasn't going very well.
Yeah,
when
but
he
not
walked
lovely.
in, I was like, oh, this guy has no idea who we are, and is annoyed he's here, and that just feels shitty.
No one
right?
doesn't know who you two are.
But I don't
It's
care.
impossible.
That doesn't matter to me.
That doesn't. And like
That
if somebody's
doesn't matter.
like Joe DeRosa came in and before we started, he's like, I have to tell you something. I hated Sopranos. I'm like, that's fucking awesome. Like that's great for the show. Like,
But why would he tell you that?
because I did his podcast. We had a great time. Like
he talks about it openly.
But it was cool. It was a fun. Like he had an opinion, which then created stuff to add. And it's like, yeah, cool. This is fun. Like I like it. Where like this was just a brick wall.
Knowing who we are is not important to us. Like
Yeah,
it just felt
of
like
course.
this person was like told that they had to be here and they didn't want to be here.
Here's why knowing who you are, I think, should be important. Because to pretend they don't know who you are is dishonest. And it's a power move. Like, it doesn't mean, like, you're not being arrogant by saying they should know who you are. It's an iconic show. You're iconic characters.
And they said they loved the show.
Right, so they know who you are. Of course. And that's what's annoying about it. It's not the lack of someone knowing who you are. It's pretending they don't because there's a power in that or some... I've had that too, where they probably didn't know, but they played power shit in other ways.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? We just have to chat.
But don't you also think as a comedian too that there's like this line that you have where you can poke fun and you can be funny and you can have your humor and like insert it in your commentary and in the conversation, but it just felt like there was just a real lack of respect for the two of us, and I just didn't like
You
that.
can sense where it's coming. Like, where it comes from is a lot important. Like, if someone is joking with... I've been shit on by people, and it just made me laugh out loud.
Yeah.
Because I know that they like me.
Of course, that's it. And we have sense of humor. We poke
Yeah, of
fun of ourselves
course.
all the time.
I loved it.
I felt so awkward
Yeah.
the entire time, and I was just trying to be really respectful. And then
Yeah, well, also, it's like this is Tom and Christina's studio, so I didn't want to, like, midway through be like,
Of
hey, like,
course.
do you not want to be here? Like, is this
Yeah.
a problem? Because I'm like, I don't know their relationship. I don't know what this isn't mine. So
100%.
I just kind of tried to, like, smile and keep going. But it was just like, yeah, it's like, and then you leave here, and like you said, it was the first time where I left here, and I was like, man, I didn't have a good time at fucking YMH Studio, which also made me grateful of being like, the 100th times I've
Yes.
been there, I've had a fucking blast every single time.
Yeah, and it's probably good that they had somebody like Howie, because doing a podcast, you are going to deal with people like that, obviously. And I'm sure some people think Rob and Jamie are being too sensitive here, but I'm glad they're just being honest, because some other people would probably just try to play it off like, oh, it was a normal podcast. There's nothing weird about it. Everybody is fine. But clearly things were uncomfortable. So I'm just glad they admit that. And maybe I'm biased because I think Howie is really annoying and I'd hate to do a podcast with him. But I think their complaints are valid. If you go back and watch that podcast or watch the video I made about it, it was clear Howie was just acting like a dick the whole time. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you want any extra content from me, make sure you go check out my Patreon account. There's probably over 70 videos on there at this point, and I post a new one every single week. So I'll put a link in the description if you're interested. Make sure you go check it out.